Well, nice to see such a well-dressed audience, very fashionable. And we're here to discuss today the impact of what you're wearing. And I wanted to do a little poll to start off with and ask you to be honest and tell me if you have in your wardrobe some items of clothing that you have never worn. So put your hands up if you've got things in your wardrobe that you've never worn. Okay. Because I read that, I don't know how many Germans there are here, but I read that in the average German wardrobe, 40% of the clothes are never worn, which is really crazy. So the impact that we're having is often for things that we're not even wearing. On average, per person, per year, we're producing about 11 kilos of waste from our clothes. Now, the environmental impact is clear. The textile sector is producing 1.2 billion tons of CO2 emissions. That's more than flying and shipping combined. So it's something that we have to deal with. It's inevitable we have to deal with it. It's not sustainable. And it's also growing. We expect a threefold increase in textiles in the next, until 2050. So you'd think that business would be very happy. There's a lot of demand there. But it's also a financially unsustainable system. We have, just last week, there were 2 profit warnings. Profit warning from Superdry, profit warning from ASOS, because they're squeezed. They have very small margins, and if they end up with too many stocks, they can't get rid of it, and those margins are just too small. So, in addition to that, our kids, Gen Z, they're also looking at the reputation of the companies that they're buying clothes from. So what can we do about it? The idea is that we need to go circular. We need a circular approach to the fashion and textile industry. Circular means getting the maximum value out of the products and assets that we have in our economies for as long as possible, and then when they do become waste, making sure that they go back into the system. And I'm a bureaucrat, I'm a regulator, I'm from the European Commission. So, of course, we try to see what we can do in terms of regulation to put things on the right channel. In 2022, we came up with a European textile strategy, and we've delivered on nearly all of that. We have, within about 3 years, we will have requirements for product design for textiles that are put on the European market for all products. We will have a new waste shipments regulation. We have extended producer responsibility coming in on the table at the moment, where we'll bring in fees for companies to have to cover the costs of the waste treatment of their own products when they get them back at the end of the product cycle. So we are doing a lot in terms of regulation. The objective, what I want to get out of today, is to find out, from talking to stakeholders, to talking to businesses, whether that is going to deliver and what are the opportunities and challenges in going circular in the next 5 to 10 years. So to help me do that, we have our also fashionable panelists here today. So we have Valerie Buiten from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Ellen MacArthur Foundation is the leading and the best known think tank dealing with circular economy. Launched by Ellen MacArthur, who initially was well known for being the fastest round the world solo yachtswoman. We keep on the ladies first. We have Marlene Barthez, who is my colleague from DG Grow, from the industry, single market and SME part of the European Commission, who is in the textiles unit and is responsible for coordinating I can see she has it here, the transition pathway for textile ecosystems. We have Dirk van Tighem from Eurotex. Eurotex, he corrected me earlier on. I was going to say it's 160,000 member companies. It's actually 197 member companies, some of them big, many of them small, across the textile and garment sector. And last but not least, we have Michael Laumann, who is from Ecopreneur. So much smaller, fewer enterprises, but a lot of enterprises that are at the cutting edge of circular economy and sustainability. So that is our panel. I'm going to start off by asking, because I think for many of you, I don't know how many of you know what circular economy is or think that you know what circular economy is. Hands again. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, a little bit. But you may think you know what it is. I want to start off by asking Michael, and I'm going to sit down now. What is a circular business? And considering that we live in a fast fashion world, how can circular businesses make money out of selling less? How is that possible? How do you make a profit from selling less?
Yeah, thanks, William. You get straight to the point. So that's the challenge. How can you make benefit from a product that is sustainable and hence probably more expensive in a market that is all based on price? So in the end, it's the consumer who's going to make the choice for its sustainable product or maybe not so sustainable product. So our members, and it's the European Sustainable Business Federation in Brussels, our members actually, some of them already have succeeded in developing a circular business, meaning controlling the resources that they're using and keeping the value, in this sense textiles, in control. So they would not let a piece of textile become waste. So they follow the principle of circular economy in extending the lifetime of a product and using business models that would all be based on rental, on repair, on refurbishing, and also of course, on easier recycling. So that's basically what they're doing, and some of them are successful, are renowned, otherwise are pretty small, and they're more driven by values because they really have understood the importance, of course, of keeping the ecosystem and the planet sustainable.
Thanks, Michael. I'm interested, I mean, I said that Ecopreneur has a rather smaller, sort of maybe cutting edge membership, a lot of eco-entrepreneurs. When it comes to your members, Dirk, what needs to change, do you think, in order to help them to become more circular and more sustainable?
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. The short and simple answer, what they want is reassurance that there will be a business model for circular and sustainable textiles. I just came back from a large textile fair in Frankfurt with thousands of textile companies. All of them focus on sustainability. If you look at their stands, similar as here, all of them want to be more sustainable, want to reduce their environmental impact, want to develop circular business models. But the question is how to be sustainable from an environmental perspective and also from an economic financial perspective. That is the single most important question. How to do that? It's a long answer. We need regulations. That's where the European Commission comes in a big way. So we need to establish rules of the game, which today do not exist. So we need to create clarity. What is circular? What is sustainability? What are the conditions to comply and make sure that everybody effectively complies with those new rules? And we need to make sure that there is a market for circular and sustainable textiles. Because we have to be honest with ourselves. The regulator wants it. The industry wants it. The consumer, not so sure. Can the consumer pay for circular, sustainable textiles? There's a premium. So we need to develop the market, we need to develop the demand, we need to help our industries to innovate, develop new technologies. We need to make sure that the rules which we need are good rules, are rules that make sense for the industrial entrepreneur, that he can manage. So that's, in a nutshell, if we can manage that transition, considering those different elements or different conditions, then this transition that we need to make can be a successful transition. But that's a very delicate, important process. And if I may add one last element, William. Of course, all that transition, these rules, this compliance, needs to happen in a global context. You know, textiles is a very, very globalized sector. I represent 200,000 textile companies in Europe. If only my companies make the transition, make the change, and the rest of the world would not follow, my companies will be in trouble from a competition perspective. So our plea to the Commission is to say, let's work on this together, regulator, industry, but also let's work on this together with our global partners in China, in the US, in South America. If we create a common global framework for a sustainable and circular textile industry, then we're good.
So you're basically saying that it's very difficult to be a circular business in a linear world. If the markets and the systems and everything else, it's very difficult for the first one to take the first step. And so I think I guess what we're trying to do, to the extent that regulators can, is to create a framework, a regulatory framework, which will help reduce that risk and make sure it's aligned for everybody. And I think that really requires very clear and harmonized implementation as well. So, Marlene, your transition pathway has done a lot of stakeholder consultation, and you've been asking companies to make pledges as well. I don't know if you can explain a little bit about that, and maybe where you see the kind of the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You know, where do we have a competitive advantage? Where are the biggest problems that you've identified in that process?
Yes, maybe I'll ask with a question to the audience first. Like, who has never heard about the transition pathway for textiles? Only two? Everybody else has heard about it before? No, I doubt it. Oh yeah, anyway, if you're interested, I have a few printed copies with me, so don't hesitate to approach me afterwards. So maybe just for those of you who are not super familiar with this, the transition pathway, which we've published just last year, it's basically our roadmap towards a greener, more digital, more resilient, more competitive textile industry. We have not, as you said, designed it ourselves, come up with it ourselves in the European Commission, so we really consulted extensively the industry who helped us put this together. And basically what it is that it identifies 8 building blocks with 50 very specific actions of what we can do to help the ecosystem transition. And what is nice is that there's also a timeline for implementation and identification of who should be doing it. Should it be us at the EU level? Should it be member states? Or should it be the industry? So if you have never heard of it before and you are in the textile industry, you should definitely have a look. It also identifies quite nicely the main challenges, some of them were already mentioned, and the strengths and opportunities of the textile industry. I'm not going to go into detail, but in terms of challenges, competitiveness, you mentioned it. A textile industry is one of the most globalized value chains that exists, meaning that it's very vulnerable to external shocks. We've seen it with COVID-19, we see it with the war. It's vulnerable to increasing prices, be it energy, raw materials, etc. We in the EU are heavily dependent on imports, meaning that we import much more than we export, so we do have a trade deficit. Competition was mentioned, sometimes unfair competitions, competition from third countries who might have lower social and environmental standards, meaning that also the labor force there is cheaper. So that's tough for our companies as well. Access to funding, I think, is a big challenge, even though we're trying to address that. And then you mentioned generally the sector is very unsustainable. We're talking here, well, raw material use, but also overproduction, overconsumption, generation of waste. Very little is recycled, especially fiber-to-fiber recycling basically is non-existent yet. But it's not all gloom and doom. We do have a number of strengths or opportunities, if I might say. The EU has a very strong position in terms of high quality, high value added products. So I think this is a segment that we can build upon more, be it, I don't know, defense equipment, high-end products, technical textiles. There's a lot of opportunities for innovation, which can also be funded by the EU. We notably have the Horizon Europe program for research and innovation. It's 95 billion euros. It's huge. It's actually one of the biggest R&I programs in the world. There's opportunities for digitalization, I think, which might also address the labor shortage or the aging workforce problem by attracting new talents, maybe younger talents, in terms of digital skills. And I think we also have a clear role in becoming a leader in sustainability. So if I had a few key messages to pass, we are at a turning point of the industry. It's we cannot ignore it. We have to rethink the way we design products, we produce them, we use them, and we dispose of them. All stakeholders need to be on board for that. This is why we have the pathway where we're collecting pledges, so it's co-implementation. Consumers need to change their mindset. I think that's very important as well. And sustainability has to come hand in hand with competitiveness. So it should not be at the cost of one another. We have to work for more strategic autonomy in the EU, for more resilience, and this has to happen through enforced market surveillance and a level playing field. So I hope that all the new rules that are coming up soon will sort of contribute to the strengthened resilience of the EU industry.
But we are trying to make Europe a fairer market in terms of making sure that the best players get rewarded. In the sense we're just bringing in the green claims requirement, whereby companies that are making claims about their products will have to be able to justify those and back them up. So we are trying to sort of get rid of some of the greenwashing. But I want to pick you up on a couple of things you mentioned. One is the fact that Europe is a big market. We have a lot of consumers, a lot of the products are imported, and also you mentioned design. And the next thing I want to talk about is actually 2 days ago in the European Parliament, the Parliament adopted the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. Now this will set a framework for requirements, design requirements for products that are put on the European market for all kinds of product groups. It's big news. I mean, it's going to be a very strong piece of legislation. Within, I think, probably the first product group to be treated will be textiles and garments. And so there will be, within maybe 3 years, requirements for garments that are put on the European market. And Dirk, I was wondering, do you think that will bite? Do you think that will really change? I mean, it's horizontal. You were talking about, needed to have equal treatment. It will be for everybody. Will that happen? And what do you think, what would be your top list of requirements, if your top 5 or so, which were the ones which really matter?
Yeah, indeed, it's very important, I think, for people not involved on a day-to-day basis. What Europe is now deciding is how this jacket will be produced in the future. We're setting very specific rules how this jacket will be produced, from a contents perspective, from a composition, and what kind of information will come with that jacket when it's been sold in the shop. That is eco-design requirement, ESPR as we call it. And it will apply across different sectors of the economy, but as William said, a priority in developing the detailed requirements will be on textiles, will be on garments. So we are discussing with the Commission a t-shirt. How many times should a t-shirt be washable? And we're in this stage of having these very technical but very important discussions, because if the end result of those negotiations is to say a t-shirt must be washable 20 times, that may mean that tomorrow some t-shirts from certain brands, lower cost brands, may not be sold any longer on the single market because they would not comply with this 20 wash criteria. That's the concept. I'm not saying 20 is just an example, but that's for you to understand the importance of that regulation. Yeah? So the principle is decided. We are indeed now discussing the details. We're focusing on the durability, on the reusability. We're focusing on recycled contents. We talk a lot about how can we handle our waste and how can we turn that waste into new fibers, new opportunity. This discussion is, as I said, ongoing. Maybe not going into the technical details. One important message, William, I think for you also, this will apply to textiles. the textiles is a very, very broad animal. I mean, this is textiles, this is textiles, this is textiles, this is textiles. So when rolling out the specifics on those design requirements, we need to differentiate very much whether we are talking a jacket, a carpet, a shoe, because obviously they have very different purposes, different composition. So that kind of very much fine-tuned setting the details is critically important for the purpose, which is valuable, but making sure that we set the details in the right way is critically important. And that's where we are in the process.
Well, yeah. The devil is always in the details, and I think we're going to have. I think that the negotiation of the regulation itself was fairly straightforward. Everybody seemed to be pretty much agreeing, but I think when we come to looking at each product group and we get into the technical details, there we'll see, will be winners and losers. But of course, being the European Commission, they will be fully impact assessed, and we will have stakeholder consultation, and it will be a very inclusive ongoing process. And I mean, it's powerful because we'll be able to ban the use of certain chemicals, things like dyes and glues, perhaps certain blends of fibers maybe. We also have the possibility of banning the destruction of unsold garments, which could be pretty powerful. When you look at how many of the garments that are sent back from when you buy things online, what happens to those? And as I've also said, some of the companies like Superdry, they have big problems with unsold stock. What are they going to do with them? They won't be allowed to destroy them if we choose to go down that avenue. Another aspect, maybe the most groundbreaking part of eco-design, is what we call the digital product passport. And I'm sure that many of the people at Hannover Messe have been using kinds of digital product passports for decades to do their logistics and so on. But what we're talking about is an obligation to identify each product, either at the level of the individual product, the batch, or the model, and put a scannable, machine-readable tag on it, and then to make information available about that product down the value chain in relation to its circularity and its sustainability. And I'm wondering, coming from the sort of ecopreneur side, do you think that kind of ability to access the information will help circular business?
Yes, I think it's important for the topic is competitive, sustainable, and circular. So if you have a circular product and you want to be competitive, you also have to be competitive in terms of providing information that your product is, or what your product is made of, for example. Huh? So the product passport is nothing else but a very crucial instrument of transparency. Because at this point, there's a lot of greenwashing. You mentioned it. The Commission is on it. We are really happy about it. Because, of course, transparency or being sustainable, as you say, the proof is in the pudding. You really have to be able, as a sustainable company, to prove that you're really the one. Whereas there are lots of companies who claim they have sustainable products. So creating the digital passport would create a level playing field in the regard of providing the information to customers in the supply chain, of course, to end consumers, to us, and to investors as well, that this is a product worth spending money on. And by spending money on it, you will help this company survive and maybe even grow, which would then, of course, create a virtuous circle by convincing other companies who are a little bit in doubt, should we adopt these kind of models, in seeing the benefit, because it's always the business case that will convince them. Our members, we talk about companies like VD, Outdoor Sports Clothing, we talk about Mud Jeans, who are renting jeans, who create jeans from, I think it's 40% recycled denim, plus 60% organic cotton, who then rent the jeans, take them back. If there's a little hole or the zipper is stuck, you just give it back. You pay, I don't think it's less than 10 euros per month, you get a new one, or you can basically be sure that they will be recycled. So it's companies who have a business model that works, but they're still stuck in their little niche. They can't scale up because people are confused. They say, oh, why should I go for this jeans? It's a little bit maybe, I go for the one that is much less expensive. It says green, has some kind of green label. And then they would fall for it. In the future, they can scan the badge or the label, and they can really see where has it been produced, by whom, where does it come from, are there toxins in there, has it been dyed, how much water has been wasted, basically. Whereas, and then they can compare, they can make an informed choice. So I think it's really, really important. And of course, I also think it will drive a lot the digitization, which is also something that all companies will need to develop proficiency on, because transparency is not just providing information to consumers and so on, but also to the financial world. We talk about reporting, so it's going to be a new world.
Come on to the end of the pipe now and talk about waste. Partly because on the 1st of January 2025, so this is just a few months away, there will be an obligation for all municipalities in Europe to separately collect textile waste. So this is only a few months away. So that's not a problem for business maybe, more of an opportunity for some of the waste management companies. But can you imagine what we're going to do with it? I mean, we're talking about 1.3 million tons per year extra textile waste. At the moment, less than 1% is recycled fibre to fibre. I think maybe 10 or 15% is reused. A lot of charity shops and so on, or online, Vinted, all of these companies are making that work better. But what about, I mean, at the moment, more than 70% is either going to landfill or incinerated. That's a huge waste. But I think, and again, I'm going to come back to Dirk. I'll talk to you in a moment, Valerie. But I know that Eurotex has done some work looking at what kind of capital investment is needed in order to actually deal with that new waste stream and recycle it. I mean, are we going to end up with it? I mean, at the moment, a lot of it that is recycled is actually downcycled into insulation or rags or stuffing for mattresses. Do you think we can get to a higher level, and how much will that cost us?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's something we've been, as a textile industry, we've been very much focusing on. As William said, to be very clear, in a few years from now, we will have between 8 and 9 million tons of textile waste every year, which we can no longer burn, which we can no longer send in ships to Africa. So that's a big pile of textile waste. And so as industry, we've been thinking, what do we do about it? Because he is saying, you're responsible for that waste. Even though some of that waste is produced elsewhere, but that's a different discussion. So we've been looking into this. How can we turn that problem into an opportunity, a business opportunity? So how can we turn that waste into recycled fibers, knowing that today the level of recycled fibers is very, very low. The level of collection of waste is very low. The level of recycles is very low. We did a big research together with an important consulting company who helped us in quantifying, let me double check my numbers. The overall investment needed to manage this waste is between 6 and 7 billion euro. That we need to build up to between 200 and 250 textile recycling plants in Europe. Because today there is no capacity. We have a big pile. There's no capacity in sorting, in collecting and sorting, and there's by far no capacity in recycling all that textile waste, whether it's chemical recycling or mechanical recycling. So we need a huge investment, and we've been, as Eurotex, let's say, facilitating a process for what I would call textile ecosystem to come together. We created an organization which is called ReHubs, recycling hubs, where admittedly large European companies, and it's not just textile companies, large European companies are willing to invest in basically recycling plants because they see a market opportunity. We know that the Commission, Europe, will force us to use recycled material very soon. We don't have those recycled material today, so we need to build factories to make sure that we will have recycled fibers. And I can tell you, some of the largest brands, European and global brands, are very interested to build those factories because they know they need those raw materials, which today don't exist. So, based on that, we haven't gathered the 6-7 billion that we need, but there is interest from the industry. There is interest from the EIB to co-invest in this. So we are building up the case step by step. There's a lot of question marks on the market, on the consumer. There's many things to be solved, but just want to emphasize, to keep it simple and short, that from the industry, we do see an opportunity to turn that textile waste problem into a value. And if you look at the market for the cost of recycled fibers, is becoming very expensive because everybody wants to have access to that new raw material, which today is not sufficiently available. And so this Rehabs initiative, which, as I said, involves very large chemical companies, very large brands, textile companies, collectors, sorters, a whole new circular business chain, value chain that we are developing. They are very committed to make this happen.
Oh, thank you, Doug. You mentioned one important word there, responsibility, and you said that we're going to try and make you responsible. And so making producers responsible for delivering and for covering the costs of the end of life of their products. So they won't be able to just put it on the market, put it on the European market, and then walk away and not worry about the end of life costs. Now, we have a proposal for a regulation on the table now. It's a revision of the Waste Framework Directive, which is we're proposing to bring in extended producer responsibility for textiles. And I would tell you what it means, but there's somebody here, Valerie, who knows far better than I do. I know that your expertise stretches way beyond that in terms of textiles in general, but can you explain to us a little bit what is extended producer responsibility, and also what makes it work better? I mean, I know that there are one or two member states in Europe that already have brought it in. What's been the experience? Are there some good lessons we could learn?
Thank you, William. I'll start maybe with the question that you used to open this panel, the mother of all questions, not what is the meaning of life, but what's a circular economy? In a circular economy, we keep our products in use for as long as possible, and when our clothing are completely worn out, they're no longer reusable, we recycle them. That's not what's happening today in Europe. Dirk just mentioned it. We have a textile waste problem, and Dirk actually said, we will soon have 8 million tons of textile waste every year, but your organization, the Commission, says in 2020 we already had 8 million tons of textiles in incineration across the EU every year, well, in the preceding years as well. So that's 8 million tons on an annual basis. Very striking. We're not using our textiles to the maximum extent, and we're definitely not recycling them, as Marleen also highlighted. One of the issues there is that the economics currently do not work for collecting textiles after use. We have systems in place, charities, but also private collectors, that are mainly focused on collecting the high-value reusable clothing, and much of that actually gets exported outside of the European Union. It mainly goes to African countries for reuse. So we really struggle to keep these products in use in the European Union and to have a viable recycling market. And EPR hopefully will change that, because EPR makes producers responsible, so it places financial, sometimes also organizational responsibility on those actors placing these textile products on the market. And that will greatly help also with the transparency on exactly how much waste do we have actually, and what happens to our textiles when they become waste, when they are discarded. Are they collected separately? Are they sorted? Are they reused, recycled, and where? Because under EPR regulations, producers need to report not only on the volumes they place on the market, but also on what happens to that. But essentially, and above all, EPR brings a financial injection into the system, really, as it imposes a fee that every producer needs to pay into the system to contribute to the management of these textiles after use. Not necessarily at end of life, as you're saying, most likely, because usually textiles haven't reached their end of life at the moment of being discarded.
Well, thanks very much, Valerie. I was very. By the way, if anybody has any questions from the audience, we're very happy to. If you want us to go a bit further into something, or if you haven't understood something, please put your hand up, and we have a microphone. Gentleman here with a microphone, who can come to you. I was very interested in what you said, Dirk. That actually. There will be a demand for these recycled fibres, and I think that getting the prices right is particularly important. You said the price of recycled fibres has gone right up, so this should hopefully give an incentive for that investment to happen. I guess it always depends on the comparison with the virgin material price, so there has to be a bit of confidence in the market to know that's going to happen. One thing which we could bring in with the eco-design requirements would be a minimum recycled content requirement. So we could say, your jacket has to have 20% recycled fibres in it. Are those kind of instruments useful? How can we get those incentives, the sort of market-based instruments in as well to push things in the right direction?
Yeah, we often have in the industry that debate. So we want to change. We want the textile industry to change, more sustainable, reduce footprint. Yes. What will be the main driver of change? Is it the market or is it the regulator? We think it's him, the regulator. Because the market, you like it or not, but the market will wait for the regulator to install rules and restrictions. Which again, what I probably said in the beginning, the quality of that regulation is critically important. Quality in the sense of, let's make sure that when we establish rules, they are realistic, they are feasible, they are measurable and controlled. And as an example, you said indeed, one little rule will say, this next jacket, how much percentage of recycled fibers should be in that jacket? It's a very important technical discussion. And to be honest, I don't have the answer myself. I'm not technical enough to know, from a technical perspective, to ensure the quality, the looks of that jacket. Do we have enough recycled fibers available? As I said before, today, no. So the discussion on, is it 20%, is it 10, is it 50, is a very, very important discussion. And as I said, we are in Brussels in that phase of discussing what is feasible, what is ambitious enough to indeed go towards a more sustainable textile industry. But it's the regulation. It's a bit strange as an entrepreneur to say that, but it's the regulation that will make the change. The market, and I know we talk about Generation Z and the consumer. I always say, William, the longest queue is always in the lower cost brands in certain streets, is not in the high end. I'm not, to be clear, we're not blaming the consumer for that. It's about purchasing power. It's about possibility. So we need to be very careful in expecting the consumer to push the market forward. And therefore the role of good quality regulations is critically important. And if you look at the recent last month's developments, if I look at the behavior of some brands, they wait for the regulation. They wait for
this is great.
They don't wait for the market.
A few years ago, I'd have never expected as a bureaucrat to be having the entrepreneurs saying, yeah, we need maybe not just more, but better regulation. So, yeah, I mean, I think that for this kind of transition, this very wide transition through the economy, it has to be guided, it has to be helped. I'm going to come. I'm going to come into Michael on this because you're talking about the longest queue and the fact that but is it always more expensive to buy the sustainable option? I mean, you could maybe just access a product like you talked about, leasing jeans. And a follow-on from that is, are your members, are they going to be forever operating in a niche? Are we talking, the customers that are actually going to buy the probably more expensive, at least for purchase cost, garments, are they always going to be, the woke green consumers, or is that niche going to really expand? What is your view on the future of that?
So, I mean, I know it's not it's a little bit crooked, but I see some comparison with also biological produced food. You see, so if you go to, let's say, a big retailer in Germany with a blue logo, I sometimes go there shopping, and I always buy the bio milk now. I buy the bio bananas, the bio eggs, because they are the same price. If you go to a supermarket, one of our members is Hannover Messe, the Frosch products, they tell us, we don't want to be, we're not a charity, we don't want the pity of the people, we want to have the same quality of products at the same price, but sustainable. And we will be able to prove it. And that opens them a huge business. They're in all over the world now. You could travel to the US. So there are business cases that actually work. And of course, now it's hygiene products. I talked about food. But I think in textiles, it is possible too. And since you were praising the European Commission, there's a big work still to be done. I don't go into the tax. That's not your authority. But there are still the same taxes getting applied for recycled clothes. Why is that? Why is the same tax recycled for remanufactured articles? Why is polyester sponsored? Because it's from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels, they don't pay any tax. It's free. So why are the virgin materials still cheaper than recycled polyester, to stay with this example? So there are huge barriers for those companies that are being kept in this uphill battle. If those barriers would fall, they would be able to scale in no time. They would basically convince a lot of their customers, investors to scale up. And we didn't talk about the true pricing. If you would count all the costs to clean water for the production of a T-shirt, to get the toxins out of the drinking water, it's the pellets, the microplastics, what have you. If you count all this in, then we talk about true pricing. The T-shirt wouldn't be €5 from Shein. There would be €25. And then if you then add the extended producer responsibility, another price incentive, then suddenly you pay much less fees for the recycling, for the end recycling of the product, whereas those who produce it with mixed materials and it's glued and it's whatever, and you can basically just burn it, nobody will take interest, they pay much more. Then more and more you get to a price at a price level to a real competitiveness. And that would make a big difference.
I think we should bring in Valerie there, because, I mean, as our expert on extended producer responsibility, this is what we call eco-modulation. Now, before everybody falls asleep, maybe you should, I think Michael was doing a good job already of explaining what that means. But how does that internalize the externalities? And I mean, do you have any examples, or, I mean, does it work? I mean, it seems that hugely complicated to actually look at every garment going along a conveyor belt at 3 meters per second and say, well, that one pays this much because it's made in this way, or I mean, how can you make that? How can you make it manageable, do you think?
Well, to start with what eco-modulation is, basically under APR policies, all producers or those that place products on the market pay a fee. That fee will then cover the cost of managing their products after consumption. But then it's the choice of national governments basically to say, actually, if your product meets certain standards on durability, for example, or it has recycled content, you get a discount on this fee. It could also work the other way around. It is possible that the government decides that if your product actually fails to demonstrate certain performance standards, you would be paying a higher fee. So you can calibrate the fees up and down based on environmental performance. This is a principle, it's widely credited and widely referenced in the EPR debates, but I would actually say that eco-design legislation, the ESPR you mentioned earlier, is more powerful to achieve changes in the design stage of a product, because through ESPR or similar product policies, you create a line in the sand, if you want. It's a minimum bar. All products need to meet this standard. And ultimately, I think this is what we need to get to. A system in which we no longer expect the consumer to be woke, I think, as you described it, or green.
Horrible word.
But simply a system in which whatever product you buy, it is one that has been designed in line with circular economy principles. Whatever product you buy, it is one where there will be a system that can collect and sort and recirculate this product when you no longer want it as a consumer. And that system needs to be in place. The burden shouldn't be on the consumer to do their research and take up their responsibility.
Yeah, I think for consumers, they already have TMI, too much information. I mean, the amount of time that most people spend when they're making their purchases, I think retailers say it's on average about 2 seconds, and people usually go for their default choice. And usually, like you said, they go for the cheapest. That's where the biggest line is. But it's a very important point you make. I think eco-design is hard legislation. It's taking the worst off the market. You will not be allowed to put it on the European market, providing that our market surveillance authorities are behind making sure that that's enforced. What is more difficult is trying to get the top runners incentivized and rewarded and recognized. And I think Michael said earlier on that the digital product passport will enable that sort of comparison making. Okay, maybe consumers aren't going to go and look at every garment and scan it and do comparison. Again, it's too much information. But I'm sure that there will be services that will do that. There'll be consumer organizations, whoever, or retailers that could say, well, if this particular environmental problem is an issue for you, then you should buy this one, not that one. So it will help people to make more informed choices. I wondered, I don't know if anybody wants to answer this, maybe you, Valerie, if labeling is another potentially useful way forward, or I don't know. I mean, because in DG Grow, you're dealing with labeling, and I think we have a review of the labeling directive.
Yes, it's true. We're also revising the current textile labeling regulation, another regulation, to harmonize the information that is on your label. Because for now, the only mandatory and harmonized rule is fiber composition. So you know if your t-shirt is made of cotton, viscose, or other. But that's the only thing at EU level that's harmonized for now. So we're currently looking into what kind of information we should make available, either mandatory or voluntary. And even if it's voluntary, it will have to be harmonized. So this is to enable consumers in making more informed choices. It will work hand in hand with a digital product passport. So the idea is not to overwhelm, as you said, with information. It will be linked. So there will be a sort of digital label as well, because obviously all the information, I mean, for now you have maybe the size, some care indications, how to wash, what temperature, etc. If you start adding the carbon footprint, etc., then it becomes a lot to put on a little label. So there will also be a digital label. And we're doing now extensive public consultations. So we're asking stakeholders for their opinion, because this is part of how we make policies. So.
Excellent. So, do we have any questions from the audience as well? Because we're okay. Please, sir, would this lady, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then.
I'm Giovanna Girardin. Actually, there's too many questions to raise.
We only have 1 hour.
I think I'll make two questions very quickly. One is, I heard two words that caught my attention. We're talking about sustainability and circular economy, and on the other hand, there's a specific word that was used, scale up. And it seems like they might not be going in the same direction. So where's the balance there? Where is the balance? Because if we are creating more regulation, what is the aim to create more regulation? Is really sustainability and is really the circular economy, or is just we're trying to put a ban on your business coming up? If we're scaling what the circular economy will be, again, producing more waste because we're scaling, no?
Okay.
And just
There's already quite a lot to chew on there, I think.
I know.
So the idea, I mean, the circular economy should mean that products last longer, so that you don't have as much waste. But there's some good points about scaling there. I mean, we're talking about, we call it a transition from linear to circular, and it's true. I mean, I'm interested in knowing who will survive. Regulation, as we've been saying, should sort of underpin and give confidence for the investments in that transition. I'm wondering, Michael, who will be the survivors? Will it be the sort of eco-entrepreneurs that are going to fill the space, or?
I mean, I hope everybody survives who gets the idea of the business model behind it. Also, an important aspect is the longevity, the durability aspect. Of course, if you create a garment with, of course, hopefully recycled content, which is at a good price, which is, of course, fashionable, and you reward the customer also with some kind of an experience that they are part of the sustainable journey. Because some people, I think a lot of people, and surveys show this, are really into the idea of participating in let's say in the transition or in a more sustainable world through their informed choices, no matter with product. So if you give them a product that is that can be used longer, that they can repair or get repair themselves, or get repaired, there's also an emotional attachment to it. You all know it. If you repair something yourself, you feel like more attached to the object. You feel like responsible. So there's this side. So it's also a matter of how can we convince the consumer to spend more on more stuff and more on quality, to change the mindset.
Don't you mean less stuff and more quality?
Less stuff with better quality. Yeah. And so in the end, they have maybe less products, but products that can be kept longer, and can be used longer. And the other aspect is, of course, that we didn't talk about is the post-sales phase. So, of course, a product that is lasts longer, you can resale. There are already platforms now. You can trade it in. You can go, of course, use it. You can transform it, do it into something else. I mean, there's lots of stuff also in terms of business model. I mentioned it before: mud jeans, renting, leasing, sharing, etc. So it's a new market. It will expand less to the make, use, waste, but more into the circular world. So it's going to be a shift, and there is a market for everybody, because everybody who's producing, who has the machines, we have the marketing machine behind it, and the finance and so on. They just have to be creative and shift a little bit towards the more sustainable. And then in the end, we might with the policy, keeping also managing the materials better, we can actually get to a point where we can decouple the growth of the market from the use or the waste of the resources. So we will need less virgin, natural resources, but we can still produce more products from with the recycled.
So in a way, what we're trying to do is keep the same level or a higher level of well-being, maybe having fewer garments and clothes, but the impact also of the production of those clothes is actually declining. So you've got this decoupling.
Yes, while sustaining your own ecosystem,
profits.
Your own profits, and be sustainable also in terms of from the environmental point of view. So your life quality won't decrease. You can still buy very nice clothes, but they are more sustainable.
And that brings me to Dirk, I think, because do you see this creativity amongst your members? I'm thinking particularly about what Michael said about sort of post-sales and being able to sort of keep in touch with your products and offer services and make profits and
Yes.
longer and more meaningful contact with customers? Is that really going to happen?
It, is it happening? If you say, do entrepreneurs look into these models? Yes, they do, but at the same time, as an entrepreneur, as an industrialist in a global competitive environment, you have to look at the numbers. You know, do the numbers add up? That's the bottom line of everything. And how to say? Even if the industry, as I said at the beginning, you know, I just came from Frankfurt Textile. Every stand is talking about sustainable textiles. Every single stand, there's 2,000 exhibitors there. But how to make it happen from a financial, economic perspective is today more than a year ago the bottleneck. And we see in the textile industry, we see companies who are in the forefront of recycling technology, of developing new products, going bankrupt today. So the mood, the economic mood for moving forward towards creating the sustainable textile industry today is not very good, regretfully. But I just want to call upon here that what we want, yes, how we get there in a realistic manner is a very different discussion that we need to have, all of us. And it's today, unfortunately, and it's linked to the market, the consumer, the regulation, the investor who is no longer, is pulling out of the sustainable markets. So there's many elements that we need to put on the table, and hoping that we are in a bit of a transition, sure, but that in the longer term we move in the right direction. But it's a bumpy road. Let me put it like this.
There are a lot of sort of policy tools that can be used. We talked a lot mostly about regulation today, but I was just wondering if I could bring Marlena in again, because there are other policies or means that we could perhaps bring in at European level to help. I don't know if in terms of developing skills, investments, leveraging public-private partnerships. What are the other areas, sort of beyond all of this regulation, which I've been talking about, that have come out of the transition pathway? I mean, the transition pathway is a very good name for it, because it's really trying to sort of set the path for companies to make the transition. And I'm wondering how are you going to pave the pathway?
No, I mean, it's true, and I think it transpires from this conversation that a lot is happening in terms of legislation, new regulations, but it's still a few years off, let's say. But there's also a lot of other things that we do at the EU. We don't produce only legislation, we also do a lot of support and coordination. We fund a lot, so funding is an issue. We try to help here. I mentioned Horizon Europe earlier on, which is our program for research and innovation. I'm happy to say we will have a dedicated European partnership for textiles to address some of the issues that have been mentioned today. Hopefully EPR fees will also help address this issue of the market not being ready there. There's also other funding instruments like Digital Europe, the Single Market Program, Invest EU. So there are quite a few EU funding programs that can help in a way. You mentioned skills. Skills is a big issue. We have an EU pact for skills for the textiles ecosystem. Dirk knows very well, since Eurotex is helping us invest in skills, reskilling, upskilling the workforce. So that's one important issue. We also have Erasmus Plus, obviously. Maybe you know Erasmus. It's not only about student mobility. Erasmus Plus is actually much more than that. Greenwashing was mentioned, tackling greenwashing. So I think there's a lot to be done there to address that problem. Consumer awareness, I mean, you said it's not the consumer that's going to push, but I think we still have to convince or raise awareness amongst consumers that buying new clothes twice a month is maybe not necessary. I mean, we know that some big brands have 24 capsule collections per year. Twice a month, new collections. Do we really need that? It used to be only once a season. Now, well, twice a month you have a new collection. So, I mean, there's also something to be done there in terms of overproduction. I mean, the transition pathway, you said it's a good summary of everything that we've discussed now, because it might seem a bit daunting, I would say, if you're an SME producing, shoes or clothes, you might be a bit scared hearing what's happening or what will happen in a few years, and all this with new responsibilities, and you will have to pay and adapt. So I would encourage you to have a look at the pathway, because it defines very concrete actions of what you can do as a stakeholder to take part in the process. We are collecting commitments, we call them. So any stakeholder, be they industry representative, member states, etc., companies, can submit online commitments, which we then publish online. So we have already over 100 pledges or commitments, as we call them, which serve as best practices. So others can maybe get inspired, look at them. The big players have participated, Adidas, Inditex, etc. So we're gathering this best practice of what's already happening, and hopefully this will inspire others. And maybe just to finalize, on the 4th of June in Brussels, but it will be hybrid, we will have what we call a stakeholder event on the transition pathway. So we will have more or less 3-4 hours to discuss everything that was discussed here more in detail, but also bringing stakeholders on stage and giving them the word to show what they're doing to help with the transition. So if you're interested, you can approach me bilaterally, and I would be happy to give you the details.
Great, well, thank you very much. Just give a little last word to you, Valerie, because the Ellen MacArthur Foundation a few years ago came up with this report which is called The New Textile Economy. And I think that we've ticked off a lot of the sort of policy and regulatory parts of that. Some of, we talked about eco-design, we talked about separate collection of textile waste, extended producer responsibility. What is your prediction? Do you think in 5 or 10 years we will have a new textile economy? Do you think that the dream, the circular dream, will become a reality? Or do you think we're being too optimistic?
I think, well, to ground ourselves first, that report is 7 years old today, so quite a while ago. I think we have made a lot of progress in the EU in terms of developing and designing new policies and really bringing the textiles industry on board of this vision of a circular economy for textiles within EU textile strategy, for example, but also with initiatives on the level of design as well as on the level of waste. I suppose for me, your question brings up the element of the rest of the world, because in the EU, 90% of what we consume is imported. It is manufactured elsewhere. And equally, our exports of second-hand clothing has actually tripled over the past decades. So we're exporting massive amounts of our clothing to other countries in the world. So also when we talk waste management, we need to think globally and talk with these importing countries and perhaps envisage ways of working together on building waste management systems, so that not just in the EU, but anywhere in the world, textiles, when they're no longer reusable, are collected, sorted, are recycled back into textiles and so on at scale, and they no longer end up in landfills, in incineration, or worse, in the environment, because there's a very real pollution problem, as we're seeing for plastic packaging. The same goes for textiles, not so visible in Europe, but definitely visible in other parts of the world.
Well, with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody. I introduced everybody at the beginning very briefly, and you'll find everybody's profiles in the Hannover Messe materials, and to get further information on all of the organisations here and their reports and so on. I think that we've learnt, well, I hope that you've learnt, that the regulation is one important part of it. We're doing a lot on the regulatory area, but there's a lot more that needs to happen, not least in terms of proper implementation of that legislation, but then we need to get the financing right, the market-based instruments. We need to get sort of some of the niche ideas scaled up, as we said, into the mainstream. So with that, thank you very much, and I hope that also in your own personal wardrobes you'll be thinking a little bit more about how sustainable your wardrobe is. Thank you to all of our panelists.